Gracie and I are at the coal mines today, and we're paying a visit to the separate apartments. Where Gracie's laying now is in the middle of a compound that was surrounded on all sides by a building that was approximately 33 metres by 26 metres, and it was two-storey. The top storey had a balcony surrounding it, but in that building there were 108 sleeping cells. It's called a separate apartment, but they were sleeping cells for the convicts to be placed in at night, as opposed to the solitary cells where they spent most of the day and the night locked in. Now, due to the large piles of brick rubble here, combined with the fact that a lot of people just walk across this not knowing what it is as a shortcut to get to the pathways and buildings on both sides of the structure, it's very, very difficult to see what was actually on the ground back when this was first built. What I'll do is I'll take you across to Port Arthur first. The separate apartments were located inside the penitentiary there, and we'll just have a look at two of those, which will give you a better idea before we start tripping over the bricks here. Gracie and I are at the penitentiary building at Port Arthur on a very wet day, and I'm just showing you the cells here on the ground floor of the penitentiary building, as they would have been very close to what the separate apartments at the coal mines would have looked like. See here on the right hand corner there was two sandstone shelves. You can't see the bottom one, you can just see the outline of where it was. On the left hand side there's two islets where the hammock would have travelled across to here. Now, I'm not too sure at the coal mines, I've got a feeling they had wooden beds or planks for a bed there instead of a hammock. You can see the window at the back, that's the same as the separate apartments, and then where these metal supports are around the side, that's the ground floor for the second storey, and then up the top there you can see the remains of a sandstone shelf, and on the left the hammock. So I expect the ones at the separate apartments would have been very similar in style to what you see here. Now, these separate apartments weren't just built at the coal mines and what you saw at Port Arthur, they were built at all the probation stations on the peninsula. The dimensions were slightly different. At Cascade they were 8 foot by 6 foot. At Saltwater River they were 8 by 5. If you head up the coast to Maria Island, they had them there at the Convict station. They were 8 by 4. With the coal mines, apparently they were 8 by 4. There's one record of the size of the cells here. I've measured what remains of these cells, and I get 2.4 metres by 1.4 metres. But in one block here they're also 2.4 by 1.5 metres, so there's a discrepancy there in the size of the cells. Now, where Gracie's patiently laying, not so comfortably on the brick rubble there, is the middle of a cell. Now, if we look on the side here, you can see the foundations of the bricks of the wall. Now, on this side here it's approximately 34 centimetre wide. They have one brick going that way and one brick going that way, and then on that side there obviously is the continuation of the next cell and the next cell until we got to the gate that was there. Now, as I said, the cell lengths here were 2.4 long, and this section here was 1.4 wide. Now, there's not too much room here. There would have been a bed on one side, a wooden bed. There wouldn't have been the hammock and nice little sandstone shelf you saw at Port Arthur. There would have just been a timber bed. I'm not sure what the flooring was, and then obviously above this there would have been a timber floor with the second storey cell right above it. Now, if we have a look at the cell beside where Gracie's laying, You can see at the back here there's a row of bricks, and this was the back wall of the cell. There's not too much evidence of where the rear wall was, except if we come along here to where the gate originally was, and there we have a better picture of our back wall for the cell that was right beside the gate. And looking here at this sandstone block, you can see there the groove in the block where the post was for the gate, and then on the other side there was, under that large piece of sandstone, was another copy of that sandstone where the gate post would have been on this side. On this side of the gate post, the sleeping cells were 1.5 metres wide as opposed to 1.4 at the block that was down on the eastern end. The length seems to be the same, but for some reason on this side they had different dimensions. Maybe they weren't working off a plan. There is no plan of this building. Maybe one of the 7 bricklayers that were down here at the time started on this side and his mate started on that side, and then later on they realised that the dimensions were different. This explains why the gate itself is not in the exact middle between these 2 blocks of cells. Now, travelling along the western wall, we come to this section here, and Gracie's right in the middle of a cell there. You can see here the foundations. This is the wall on this side, and then when we travel across to here, you can see the foundations of the wall travelling there. Now, between the block that lines up with the gate and the eastern wing where there were 10 cells, there's a gap, and I believe this gap allowed the entrance and exit to the 2 cells that were situated here. So there would have been a doorway across here, and then a doorway across here, and there's a gap here of 1.4 metres to here, and that gave them enough room to get in and out of those cells. And then the next cell, I believe, would have started here, and then the 10 cells going in that direction down there. I don't know the dimensions on this side here. I marked them out as 1.4, as the majority of the cells seem to be here, but on this side here there's hardly anything left to work off. On the eastern block though, I do have 4 bricks amongst all this, and I believe these 4 bricks here are the front of the cell, and then from here I worked out 2.4 metres back to give me the rear of the cell, which does marry up with where the cell were located at that end there, because I can see a foundation of the edge of the cell block. Now, back over on the western side, I'm right above where the entrance is to the solitary cells. Now, these separate apartments were built after the 18 solitary cells were built here. After all that was completed, there was a further 18 that was built on this side, and they've almost disappeared completely. But where Gracie is now is on the first row of solitary cells that were here. And this string line here, I believe, is where the back wall of the separate apartments came to. They wanted to build these over the top of the solitary cells as it gave more seclusion to the solitary cells. When the solitary cells were located there under the penitentiary, the prisoners in the solitary cells could hear the prisoners above them in the wards. Once this was built here, the difference between the height of the solitary cell's roof and the separate apartment floor was quite a big difference, and they were almost soundproof, the solitary cells. This might give you a better idea of what I'm talking about. You can see there the row of bricks that goes along there above the wall there. Well, that's about the roof of the solitary cell that's on the other side of that brick wall, and then you can see the packing of bricks that goes above that. There's almost 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 layers of bricks, I believe, packed there. Some of it is loose rubble, but it just gives you a good idea of how much earth bricks was packed above it, the solitary cells. And then you would have had on top of that the flooring and the 2-storey separate apartments above it. Where my string line is I believe is where the separate apartments finished. This row of bricks here. And you can see they travel along here, and this would have been a cell, the last cell of the 18 that travelled along the southern wall here. Now where this brick is here, I believe is the front of the cell that would have continued up here. Of the 10 cells were on this side, and if you have a look here, you can see here how deep these bricks go. Before, this would have been, I believe, the flooring of the separate apartments, but these bricks below were laid on top of the solitary cells that would have been below where I'm standing now. Now there is a plan of the separate apartments that was drawn around 1843, but it does not resemble what's on the ground today. And the plan is basically 3 lines, where that banksia is there at the gateway. There was proposed to be a overseer's quarters, but that was never built there. I believe it was built in a different location, which I've shown on a previous video. Now construction itself, it didn't start until early 1845 and is believed to be completed by 1847. The reasons possibly why it took them so long is, first thing is, the construction down here was supervised by a foreman of works who was a Royal Engineer, and he was in charge of the building projects down here, especially in regards to the penitentiary and some of the other buildings. But for some reason he didn't appear around here around 1845 when construction started on this, and without the supervision of a qualified engineer, the supervisors on the ground had no skill in whatsoever in building something like this, especially the complexity of a 108 cells, 2-storey high. So that would have hampered things. They also were constructing at the same time the 18 solitary cells down here, and if you can see some of the brickwork and the arches and that go on here, there was a complexity of brickwork which does not seem to appear anywhere else around here. The 7 bricklayers that were down here would have been kept busy with that for most of the time. Another contributing factor to how long it took to build this was the bricks required. Now let's pop up to the brick kiln at the coal mines and we'll talk about the brickwork that was involved in building this building. So the question we have now is, where did all the bricks come from to build such a large structure? I'm down at the brick kiln at the coal mines. What's left of it over there is a large mound of bricks that were bulldozed in that direction from the brick kiln, so we don't really have a good picture of how big it was, and there are no plans on it, of course. But we can work out roughly how many bricks were produced down here. A good brick maker could produce about 125 a day. So in around 1846, the coal mines had 4 brick makers down here. So going off that figure, I work out that they could produce probably on a 6-day week around 12,000 bricks a month. Now keep in mind that it took around 15,000 bricks to build just a freestanding horse stable. Port Arthur had a bigger kiln over there, and they had up to 10 brick makers working, and they were producing up to 75,000 a month. So what I suspect is that a lot of these bricks that we use for the separate apartments not only come from the brick kiln here, but also came from the larger brick kiln at Port Arthur. They were shipped across on barges. They would have to go the long way round, so to speak, and the length of the journey and the weather at the time would have affected how the deliveries were made from Port Arthur to the coal mines. Now I asked somebody to try to work out how many bricks were used at the separate apartments. Thank you, Martin. And he came up with a figure of around 170,000. Now, as I said before, it took 15,000 to make a freestanding horse stable, so that figure might be a little bit conservative, but it gives us a bit of an approximate idea of how many bricks might have been used. Now, the primary reason why these separate apartments were built was the colonial authorities and the authorities back in England were worried about the homosexuality that was alleged to have been occurring down at the coal mines, as well as the other convict stations on the peninsula. Now, one has to keep in mind that the separate apartments that were built here were also built at the other probation stations here, as well as Maria Island, and even a smaller version of this was built up at Hobart, around the border of Taroona and Kingston on the near the shot tower. So it wasn't just the coal mines where these separate apartments were built, and I don't think the homosexuality level was any different here than it was in the other probation stations where they had 300, 400 men, the same as the coal mines. It's often given as one of the main reasons why the coal mines were shut down, but I believe the main reason it was shut down was economic reasons. I think the last year it was in operation, it cost £6,000 to run, and the money they got from the coal was only $3,000, and the colonial government was very short of cash, and this was just shut down as a cost-cutting measure, more than what the homosexuality issue may have been. Now, just if you're wondering what these large orange steel posts are, they were put here, I believe, around 1978 when National Parks did some restoration here. They've got them in each corner of where these separate apartments were. The two levels on it are supposed to represent the bottom floor, and the post going up is the top floor. The two posts down on that side, that corner and that corner, they are in the wrong position, but they may have just placed them there either because they didn't know the right position or they didn't want to damage the brickwork that is above the solitary cells. So there you have it, the separate apartments at the coal mines.